Now, Anglican Church Archbishop of Cape Town, Thabo Makgoba, has called for a special indaba to resolve the war in Ukraine. He joins the many voices of religious leaders across the globe calling for peace to prevail. We're joined now by the Archbishop to take the discussion forward. Arch, good afternoon and thank you very much for your time. You know, we've spoken to politicians, civil society on this matter, and I think it's only fitting that we concluded with religious leaders as our moral compass in society. Please just take us through your inputs of a high-level peace initiative. What form would it take?
Thank you so much, Mfundo. You know, most people in Russia and in the Ukraine are religious people, including the head of state in Russia. And we've got the Catholics, we've got the Orthodox churches and a number of other denominations. And in the past, I mean, we've never advertised how we mediate, but I think if we've got those head of churches, maybe somebody from the Methodists also, somebody from the World Council of Churches, and somebody from the Anglicans in Europe, meeting with their principals, whether politically, economically, and those that may be indirectly benefiting from the war. I have a strong belief that we can break through this unnecessary invasion and war that is making God's people to suffer.
I'm glad you mentioned that unnecessary, very unnecessary. How heartbreaking is it, though, that in our era we are living through a pandemic and now we would have been the generation that lived through this type of a war? How difficult is it, a burden for church leaders to actually watch this?
Mfundo, it is actually a burden. We don't need wars. We need peace. We need development. We need advancement in dealing with pandemics. And we need to resolve the question of the scarcity of fresh drinking water for a number of people. We need to deal with poverty and malaria in other places. And now to take millions and millions of dollars and use them in ammunition and machineries of killing and maiming people, and not only maiming and killing people, but destroying the environment with the potential of escalating to nuclear is very painful. And we should use every iota of that we have within us to offer prayer, to encourage diplomacy to take place, and to halt the war. So it's the level of my concern about it.
Speaking of diplomacy, what do you make of our position as South Africa? We opted to abstain. We didn't vote, yes, and as much as it's non-binding, but this is now a political position that we took on this matter. What do you as a religious community make of that?
I hope we can just be really direct and frank, and maybe also basing our decision on where we come from as South Africa. And for some of us at 62, Mfundo, this year, we still have memories of how the United Nations backed some of our political principles and South Africans and ensured that apartheid was frustrated and was defeated. And so for me, it is unthinkable of South Africa not supporting the tenets of the UN that wants to avert war. I understand the importance of diplomacy, of dialogue. I understand the importance of indaba with an Ubuntu ethic, as I said in theological terms. But my predecessor, but one, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, used to say, when somebody is suffering and you say, I am neutral, you have already taken a position with the oppressor. So it is, I wish we could be bolder.
You wish for boldness from our country to pick a position at this point.
Yeah.
You know, I was speaking to the SACP's Alex Mashilo, Archbishop, just before I spoke to you on this matter. And he raised a very important point, that war doesn't just take place on the day they fire the first gun. There would have been belligerent behavior that we would have seen, that we or society or even world leaders should have intercepted, you know, with that foresight that this action will lead to such, which is what we're seeing now. Do you think that world leaders failed to respond swiftly when they first heard the first threat, or they saw the conduct or behavior that this could lead to war?
For the world leaders sometimes can be very worrying in terms of their response, and I wish the turnaround was quicker. Again, from another context, if one look at the genocide in Rwanda, and how world leaders either were in denial or they took their time, and people were dying. So I hope world leaders really could, of course, they need to check their intelligence, they need to do their research, but when it is obvious that, as you say, there is belligerent behavior, some degree of being decisive is needed. I know sometimes if you are decisive, you worry as a world leader that you're not sure who you're dealing with. They might actually release nuclear, and the bulk of the people may be affected. So you check what are the consequences of speed and accuracy as opposed to saving more lives and giving diplomacy a chance, but not at the expense of people dying.
Now, Arch, you're in New York currently. Is that the sentiment there at the event that you're attending? Is that the sentiment that really you need to all collectively call for peace and somehow for Russia to withdraw and go back to the negotiation table and discuss this amicably?
Yes, I attended the inauguration of the rector of Trinity Wall Street, and I preached on Sunday there in New York. And the sentiment, I think, most people are actually much more robust than I am. They were very clear that there has to be sanctions. Russia must withdraw. In fact, somebody was puzzled that I prayed for the people of Russia and the people of Ukraine. And I was just saying, the people on the ground are not the ones that are waging the war, but their political principles. So, but that shock was indicating the fact that people were just really fed up with Russia and say, leaders must take a decisive position and Russia must withdraw. And if Russia doesn't withdraw, there has to be sanctions that force Russia to be on its knees. So that was the sentiment that was picking up in New York.